I think we've all managed to maybe calm down just a little bit after the last episode. I mean, calm down? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? It's a bit good, isn't it? A little bit good. Some records there that perhaps might not be broken for a while. Going into this episode, you're gonna see that we have a -1 on the down counter. So for people who are new to the channel, we gave our dilithium up in last week's episode. Now, here are the differences. You have your normal up, that's every week. Then you have your Latinum up, which is your top up of the episode. Then we have our dilithium up. That is our top up of the season. And a dilithium up has the power to remove 1 down. So that's why we're going to start with a -1 this week. But bear in mind that on the downside of things, you've got your normal down, then you've got your Trellium down. Now your Trellium down is just your biggest down of the week. But you also have a Trilithium down, which is the exact opposite to a dilithium up. A Trilithium down can take away 1 of the ups. So here you go now. If you want to save this somewhere for ease of access, that is grand, because we had a few questions about that last week. So there you are, just a reminder. Now shall we get going with this? This week, we are focusing on Dr. Mbenga with a lot of backstory with Chapel as well. This is stark. Now, this is, I'm gonna say, this is a grim episode. It's a very Deep Space Nine episode of Strange New Worlds, in that it confronts trauma and it confronts the horrors of war right up front. I think I will say this right now, I was not expecting this much of a 180 from last week's episode. Doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it, but I mean, wow, I was not expecting it to go as hard as it does. We're going to kick off straight away with an up this week, which is the introduction of a new starship. Now, it's not there for very long. It's the USS Kelsey May. Looks to be a single nacelled starship, and the way that the deflector dish dips down, I think it seems like there's some sort of inspiration between that and the Duder class from Star Trek Picard's 3rd season, the USS Intrepid. Maybe not, maybe it's just a coincidence, but I saw a bit of a connection between the two there. And then it's gone, that's it, it's the only shot of it in the episode, but I'm a starship man, I see a ship, it generally gets an up. This week, the guest of the week is Ambassador de Gras, and I will talk at length about him in a moment, but it is the introduction of another Klingon character in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is wonderful, but it's also going to deal head-on with the people who are war veterans and the people who aren't. Because, of course, remember, the Enterprise itself didn't serve in the Klingon War. Some of the crew did, but the Enterprise itself was sent off. There's actually a little reminder in the previously on section of this episode, which shows a couple of shots from the Battle of the Binary Stars. It was actually nice to see a little bit of Discovery footage here, even if it's in the previously on, and Discovery era Klingons. Wherever you come down on the argument for either the Klingons were brilliant or the Klingons were dreadful, or maybe you just don't care and you're just like, okay, they exist. It was actually kind of nice to see them again, because the one thing I don't want is complete lack of drawing attention to the fact that there are different looking Klingons. So we do get that at least in the previously on. I did think that maybe we would get that as the episode went on. We would get flashback shots of Klingons, and I suppose, spoiler, we don't get any shots of any Discovery era Klingon. It's neither an up nor a down, but yeah, for me, it stood out. The reason I say all this is to set up the stage for when Ambassador de Gras arrives on the Enterprise and is, he is pretty traditional Klingon looking, but there's all of this reference to when we fought in the war, when we fought in the war. I was hoping for maybe a few shots of the Klingons together. Now, one of the people who we know served in the Klingon War is Erica Ortegas. We cut to a shot then on the bridge of Ortegas sitting in the big chair talking to Uhura. I actually really like this scene. One, I just like Ortegas in the chair to begin with, but this exchange where Uhura clearly didn't serve in the Klingon War, and Ortegas did. Uhura's arguments for accepting Ambassador de Gras on the ship is from a sort of an academic standpoint. You know, she lists why it's amazing that a Klingon general, particularly a Klingon general of his reputation, is now suing for peace on behalf of the Federation. It's explained that he's a defector. And Ortegas starts listing off just some of the campaigns that he not only was a part of, that he led. And quite frankly, they both have compelling arguments. Well, you know, we can look at the positives for the future versus, yes, but we do have to deal with the negatives of the past. And I thought that was handled, it's very, very brief, but I did think that was handled quite well in this scene. Now, there is a scene it's not funny per se, but Ortegas is still describing some of the crimes that he has been accused of when he arrives on the bridge. There's just a moment of, you know, you could see it's written all over Uhura's face, like, he's behind you. And Ortegas is like, yep. There's no apologies or anything like that, because we're just going to be very professional and we're going to continue on as if you didn't hear everything I was just saying about you. By all appearances, all outward appearances, and by a lot of what he says, de Gras seems like someone who faces his past head on at this point. He is well aware of his reputation. He is well aware of what he's been accused of or linked to or downright proven to have done. Rather than get hung up on the Starfleet crew talking about it, he just effectively brushes it off. That's going to be a waste of time. So let's work on moving forward. So at this point in time, he seems like one of the ideal people to be representing the Federation in peace talks with the Klingon Empire. As part of his tour of the Enterprise, there is a vaguely kind of comic scene in the mess hall where Spock and Mitchell have been attempting to make Raktajino. It's, you know, I had a couple of smiles on my face in this scene, I won't lie. You know, first it's too cold, and then when he tries to pick it up, it's too hot. And it's quite hot, and there's a kind of a tense moment where he effectively burns his hand, and Pike's like, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. And for Spock, he's mortified that this has happened. De Gras, who I will call Ra from here on in, as he asks Pike to do so, as he says himself, you know, the Klingon pronunciation is quite difficult. He's very anti-Klingon. That's something to really bear in mind. He's not one of your typical Klingon warriors. But Pike says, come on, we're going to bring you to sickbay, you know, to get a dermal regenerator for your hand. We'll get this sorted. And this, of course, sets the stage for the main part of the episode. We know that M'Benga and Chapel served in the Klingon War as well. And we know through some of the dialogue that M'Benga's seriously carrying scars when it comes to the war. The moon of Jagal was specifically called out in the pilot episode of this season. And this man, Ra, has earned the nickname the Butcher of Jagal. So when he walks into sickbay with Pike, M'Benga literally shrinks back. And he goes back into his chair and he hides. And you know, he has been dealt a proper shock when he walks in. And this sets the stage for the first of our flashbacks of the episode. I do want to say, from right at the beginning of this, a very welcome up for the return of Clint Howard to Star Trek. Clint Howard is one of Star Trek's earliest guest stars. He played the childlike version of Baylock in the original series episode, The Corbomite Maneuver. He also appeared in Star Trek Deep Space Nine's Past Tense, which of course, as we know, got a nod last week. He appeared in Enterprise as a Ferengi in the episode Acquisition, and he also appeared in Star Trek Discovery, Will You Take My Hand, as an Orion on Kronos. So he has now appeared in yet another iteration of Star Trek. He's catching up with you, Jeffrey Combs. He's catching up with you. He seems to be playing the de facto leader, if you like, of this medical troupe that Chapel has just arrived to at this point in the war. I'm going to address this now. I have a down. So this is now going to say 0, but the down is that it's not the uniforms that the medical staff are wearing, it's the tactical uniforms for the away mission. If you think this is happening during season 1 of Star Trek Discovery, those tactical uniforms with color. Now that's the important thing here. With color had not yet been introduced. The ones with color, they seem to be a Strange New Worlds one only, and including them here does seem like a little bit of a retcon. Honestly, as well as the rank insignia. Love it or hate it, the Discovery rank insignia had that line down the middle, and this is set during that war. And that speaks to, I think, my point I was making about the Klingons in the beginning of this and how I had hoped to see more Discovery era Klingons throughout this episode specifically, is it does seem to be trying to do a bit of a hard retcon on the aesthetic of Discovery. You established it in the previously on, that yes, look, those are the Klingons from Discovery era and everything, and then to then go, well, actually, no, we're not going to include them in this episode. It's fine, it's your choice. But to kind of subtly put Strange New Worlds era things in there, it just, to me, it stood out. So that's why it's a down. Again, if you disagree, totally fine. Still, everyone make sure you know, no need to take anything so seriously. We're all having a bit of fun here. Well, he's not, but everyone else. The opening of this flashback focuses on Chapel and, you know, her basically arrival into Hell. I get real shades of the Siege of AR-558 here. This idea of it being a very Deep Space Nine episode, it seems to be like directly inspired by the Siege of AR-558, which is possibly one of the starkest episodes depicting war that Star Trek had previously done. Enterprise Season 3 gets pretty heavy as well. The level of violence that's shown in this episode, chaos that Chapel is delivered down into, it really sums up what's happening in this offensive, which is just killing for killing's sake, is discussed as the episode goes on. There is a complete lack of resources, which leads to, depending on how squeamish you are, a fabulous scene where Chapel has to keep a man's heart beating by manual compressions. Now, I've watched every season of ER several times, so this to me was like, oh, okay, that's what they're doing. I will admit, still a bit of a, okay, Star Trek, we're doing something different here. But I have to just say, Babs Olusunmokan in this episode is just flawless. There is an inherent challenge in playing trauma, because if you overdo it, it edges into melodrama. And if you underdo it, it's like, well, he's fine. And how do you walk that line? Babs nails it. You know, the first shot of him in the past is his foot. And you're like, oh, okay. And then he hops up, he was trying to get some downtime because it's Chapel has just arrived. He's been doing this day in, day out. They're trying to recruit him for a secret Black Ops mission. He says, look, I'm out of that. I'm a healer. I'm here to heal. I'm here to be a doctor. And we then find out that he's got the highest hand-to-hand kill ratio of like any of them, which, having seen the Broken Circle, and you've seen his skill at combat, you can really believe that. But the fact that they make a point of saying here, no, I'm here to heal. You know something's going to happen. We spend the rest of the episode hopping between flashback and contemporary. There is a reception for the ambassador in Pike's quarters, and there is a propaganda to who is invited. Now, normally you think, oh sure, who gets invited to these dinners? Well, all of the senior staff, you know, because that's what Star Trek does. This time, cleverly, you have number one, you have Spock, you have Uhura, but you have Ortegas, Mbenga, and Chapel, because they are war veterans. So the idea of them sitting down with Ambassador Ra, everyone sitting in peace and harmony, itself is a propagandistic image that can be used for morale. So it's what they try and do. And Erica's the first one to break. She quotes to Kuvma, "Remain Klingon," because that's what she remembers being shouted through the speakers, everything, because those words are burned into her head. After a certain time, she can't take this playing nice with him anymore, because Ra's reputation has him killing his own men to get off the moon of Jagal. Now, obviously, that's a hell of a charge, and what that means, he is known for killing his own men based on the crimes that they committed on that moon. That was the basis of his defecting to Starfleet, and that's the basis on which he has made his peace talks to the Klingons. But to a soldier like Ortegas, she's like, you can't even be trusted to lead your own men, so why the hell should we trust you here? And to be honest, it's a fair point. There is something to be said for once you turn your back on something you pledged to believe in so fully, how can anyone ever trust you again? It's discussed in Star Trek before that even defectors will never be given free rein. It causes Ortegas to leave the room. Now, Chapel, who was on double whiskeys at this point, goes, I'm gonna go and see if there's anything she needs, and she manages to get out of there. There's a bit of an exchange just before that between herself and Spock. Spock very clearly is trying to go, I am trying to help, I don't understand. He doesn't understand the core problem, and that will come back. And Mbenga remains behind. He is about to break the arm of his chair as he listens to Ra regale them with stories. Pike, he notices and said, Joseph, why don't you go and see if Chapel needs help? And as he's going, there's a very tense moment where Ra grabs him by the arm, and honestly I thought that was going to be the moment, but no. Ra says, I believe your security officer La'an tells me that you practice full contact Mokbara. Would you like to arrange a sparring match? And in my head I was like, oh, you're a dead man. And he says, yes, that would be wonderful, thank you. And he steps outside, and the restraint that man has shown there. But now I want to take a second to talk about Jess Bush. Up. She's brilliant. I think she's been one of the real revelations of Strange New Worlds for me, because frankly, she's expanded the role of Chapel so much than we had seen before. To see her interactions back in the flashbacks in the Klingon War, back, there's that moment where she sees what Mbenga is about to set out to do. She's not cheering him on for the sake of cheering him on. She has lived through this horror with him. Again, she has her hands in a man's chest to keep it pumping. That man later goes back out in the field and is brought back with a surprisingly graphic slit throat. This is TVMA, if ever there was one. This was grim. And she understands the anger, the pain that Mbenga's feeling and that everyone on this planet are feeling. In fairness, Strange New Worlds, you could have dropped the massacre of Jagal in episode 1 and just said, oh, that was very bad, and we would have believed you. I believe you after this episode. But yes, Jess Bush is incredible, and it leads into her scene with Spock, and Spock he's trying to help, he's trying to be nice, but because he doesn't understand the core issue, he's not able to. There is, of course, that moment in the Previously On where we remember Ortega's going, Spock, sometimes you just need to learn to leave people alone. And he helpfully says, you need time to yourself away from me. And he leaves, and you don't get that sense of he's storming off. And it's a funny old scene, and I think it works very well, down entirely to the performances. And yes, for all of this, Jess Bush, just fantastic. There's a very important line in that exchange where Spock speaks about the numbers of who died in what battle. And Chapel goes, no, there's a difference. I'm paraphrasing. There's a big difference between statistics and reality. It's one thing to say this was the greatest battle or the greatest massacre, or this was only a skirmish. It's quite another thing to live it. And again, Spock doesn't know that lived trauma. It's a powerful line. There is one of the moments of the flashback is quite grim, and also goes a good bit toward explaining Mbenga's plan with keeping his daughter in the pattern buffer last season, is that when patients would come in so critically injured that they couldn't help them with the resources they had, something they did was store them in the pattern buffer. And it's basically like putting them in stasis. And there's a horrible moment in this episode where all the power's been knocked out, they can restore a transporter to allow survivors to beam in, but they can't do it while something's in the pattern buffer. And Chapel freezes, and Mbenga doesn't. He just simply clears the pattern buffer. He's just killed that man. Now, obviously, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, but that moment, in a very Star Trek way, seriously hammered in the true cost of war and the choices one needs to make sometimes, which is why it's absolutely an up. We get the scene of Ra and Mbenga practicing Mokbara together, and even though Ra walks with a cane, this should be a pretty one-sided fight. I mean, he's a Klingon, he is naturally stronger than a human. Mbenga does his best, and there's a lot of exchanges, and Ra quickly says about if they can become allies, if not friends, then again, these two survivors of Jagal, if they can put it behind them and move forward, can't all Klingons and Starfleet? Is Mbenga being so rigid here? Is that the problem? Should, with some counseling, might Mbenga be able to help this man strive forward and, push the two warring parties or truce parties together? All is not well on the ship. And thankfully, Una sees it. And she comes into Chris in the ready room and she says, here's a new course. And he's like, okay, this takes us through a nebula. Why are we doing this? And she's like, Chris, we need to get this man off the ship. For all of his smiles and all of his trying to make everyone, like him, morale is at an all-time low. All of the war vets are seriously unhappy that he's there. And she makes the point of like, yeah, maybe there will be peace and understanding going forward, but we don't have it now. Chris asked the question, can people not make up for their past? And Uhura asks, or at least says, it's not fair to make people ignore what they've been through. That exchange isn't up. Because they're both correct. People should be able to at least attempt to atone for the sins of the past, but you cannot expect forgiveness like that. I thought it was Strange New Worlds is coming out swinging this week. We get the final exchange between Ra and Mbenga in sickbay, and Mbenga, who is sporting a Daktag knife that he got on Jagal. The moment it's in a case, and he goes, right, what are the charges against you? And Ra goes, that I killed my own men because of the atrocities that they committed against the civilian populace of, the Athos colony. And Mbenga effectively goes, would it shock you to know that I know you didn't do that? Because he says, which of them fought the hardest? And you can see that there's something wakes in Ra's mind, and he gives one of the names, and there's a bit of it back and forth, but then Mbenga goes, he wasn't the one that fought the hardest. And he says another name, and he reveals himself, he is the so-called Butcher of Jagal. Now, the whole revelation is there. Ra had taken credit for Mbenga's kills to then say, I killed my own men because of the crimes they committed. And he then left. He makes the point of, he regrets his cowardice and he tried to make something good out of it. But Mbenga knows that on his escape, Ra gave the order, kill everyone who wasn't a Klingon soldier, including children, including all civilians. There's very little coming back from that. Now, there is a couple of just points I need to make here. I do have a down, because it does look like at one point that Ra is, there's tears running down his eyes. Klingons don't have tear ducts. It's one of the core things we know about Klingons. So that, to me, was a down. It could have just been a makeup thing, but that, to me, was a down. The other thing is, this whole exchange is incredible, and it's tense, and it's a very damp, but it's hidden behind frosted glass. And it's not that I wanted to see the fight, it's why include it in that kind of obstruction. As if to suggest that actually maybe Mbenga didn't stab him, but we know he did. Chapel sees the whole thing that Ra attacks Mbenga first. Now, that to me is a down, that it was shown behind frosted glass. If this is a bait and switch in some way, I look at removing that down, but also I don't see why you would bait and switch to reveal that either Mbenga started the fight or Ra did. It was a bit of a strange decision. That said, the whole exchange, and then, we see Ra on the ground, knife in his heart. Chapel testifies that Ra attacked Mbenga. Pike goes to Mbenga, and, he starts gently, and he says, look, there's probably going to be an inquiry, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Standard issue, seems pretty open and shut. And then once that's out of the way, he goes, Joseph, I have to know. And Mbenga says, I didn't start the fight. And then Chris goes, how long have we known each other? And Mbenga goes, too long to count. He says, I'd like to think you could come to me with anything. And Mbenga says again, I didn't start the fight. And you can see what's happening. Chris is doing the generally very, normal, accepting, I will approach you as a friend, this is a safe space. And Mbenga makes an incredible point. He says, you haven't lived my life. You have the privilege of believing the best of people. Up, first of all, for the point that's being made. But the fact that it's between these two characters, for me, is my Latinum up of the week. Because he's right. Captain Pike has experienced a lot, and as we know, will experience a lot again. But he is the Boy Scout. He is the Superman, if you like, of this show. Mbenga has lived, and Mbenga has seen what horrors there are out there, and he knows that while everything might seem fine on the surface, it's just as likely to break again down the line as we get with that example of the biobed. Now, at this point, would you care to join me at Cetacean Observations? Yes, we put Cetacean Observations back at the end of the episode again for you. Now, we have the Prospero system, which is mentioned, of course, which is a reference to Shakespeare's The Tempest. We have the bosun's whistle that blows as Ra appears on the ship. He shouts out a bird of prey. Now, Ortegas mentions the colony at Zeta Athos. This could be a reference to a couple of things, but Athos 4 is mentioned a couple of times in Star Trek in the base on which Michael Eddington makes his last stand in Blaze of Glory. The DS9 Raktajino Cup makes a return, which was very cool. We get a shout out for Kronos and of course Raktajino itself. We get a shout out to it cost a bottle of Romulan ale, and then Patterns in the Buffer, which as we know is a shout out to last season. And Mbenga says that Biobed 2 hasn't worked properly since the Gorn attack. Pike asks for some Delton parsley, of course a nice reference to Lieutenant Ilea there. Chris makes some jambalaya, which may not be a reference to Ben Sisko, but also probably is a reference to Sisko and DS9, it being such a DS9 themed episode. We get some blood wine, which of course is mentioned over that dinner. The ambassador says it's almost as difficult as trying to get a Tellarite to give a compliment. Spock speaks of Sun Tzu, which of course we heard Giorgio talking about before. The young soldier that Mbenga saves and befriends on the planet says he lives in New Angeles on Terra Luna, which is, it's evocative of episodes like Valiant, where we talk about, a lunar schooner, and of course Star Trek First Contact with New Berlin and Lake Armstrong. The scarred Andorian, so there's Andorians walking around. Uhura says that Ra's outlook is very like Enar existentialism. Of course there's Mokbara, the Klingon calisthenics. We have effectively the poor kid in a red shirt, and there's a Vulcan there as well. We have the Klingon Dak Tag knife, which has a glorious upgrade. I have to say I really like that redesign. Sonic showers to full. I believe the last time we saw in live action, we've seen it in Lower Decks, but in live action was the Star Trek Voyager episode Juggernaut. There we are then. That is everything for our episode this week. Very different from last week. Let us know what you thought in the comments below and over on social media. You'll find us on Twitter at TrekCulture. You'll find us on Instagram at TrekCultureYT, and we're on Blue Sky at TrekCulture as well. I'm at Sean Ferrick on Twitter and Instagram, the usual, and you can catch Chris at EditChrisEdit on Twitter and Instagram as well. Folks, thank you so much. Let us know how you felt after this episode. This was a heavy one. Of course, we have the musical next week, which hopefully will bring the spirits back up again. But in the meantime, make sure that you live long and prosper. Make sure you look after yourselves. Our friends in Ukraine, Slava Ukrainia. Everyone, you are awesome. You are brilliant. Look after yourselves. However you're feeling, know that you are never alone. And we are here for you. And we will support you, whatever you need. All right, lots of love, everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye.